Hey folks. So one of the things that we have trouble with in getting from the news media about the macroeconomic scale of the COVID-19 outbreak is that reporters like easy numbers and they like big numbers, but maybe not correct proportions. So I spent a good chunk of today putting together a spreadsheet that can put some of that in perspective for you. Let me bring it up here and center it a little bit. So what I did is I went to the Wikipedia page, which is fairly well maintained, and downloaded this orange block of data on cases, deaths, and recoveries by country. And this is the sort of thing that you hear about in the news when they talk about the United States now has the largest outbreak in the world. Okay, so that's given there. The thing is, you really need to scale that by population to get some sense of how bad things actually are on the ground. The United States is a big country. So over here, I went and downloaded population data from Wikipedia as well. And then I reconciled them off to the right, and that's not as easy as it sounds, because if you go back over here and you look, there's footnotes in brackets next to most of these. There's different footnotes in brackets next to most of these. There's also spaces and whatnot that need to be trimmed. So here's what I did off to the right. So in this pale blue box here, okay, I cleaned up the names of all the countries from what we see over on the left here to what's over on the right. In the darker blue box over here, I did the same thing for the names used for the population data and ended up with a cleaned up list. And then I reconciled those two lists over here in green to get a list of countries in order as they're listed in terms of number of cases here. But then I also got them matched up with their populations over here. So part of the reason I'm doing this, of course, is we're 5.5 times the size of Italy. We can see that right here. We should have 5.5 times as many cases, and we just don't. Now the green ones all go together, so in the next green block, what I did is express all of these as a percentage of population. Now these percentages of populations are not really very high. I mean, these are correct numbers even here for Italy. That's less than 1% of the population has tested positive for the virus. But that's just the thing. That fraction of 1% of the population that tested positive for the virus is what is crashing the healthcare system in Italy. So it's not like it takes everybody getting sick in order to bring on a disaster. The next darker shade of green actually ranks all these numbers here from smallest to largest so I can sort them out. And then in this very dark green group over here, okay, I took this list in the lighter shade of green, okay, and said, hey, I'm going to go in this middle column right here, okay. The number one country is actually the second one on the list. That's why there's a 2 there. The number 2 country is actually the third one on the list. That's why there's a 3 there, okay. But say the number 4 country is actually 25th on the list, and so if I look down here, I should be able to see the 4 down here. So this allows me to sort the countries in order of severity. And when we come over here, okay, this pale pink one is the cases as a percentage of population. And remember that this is not necessarily telling us a whole lot because there's two things going on here. One is how prevalent the disease is within the population. That'll make the number go higher. But then also how much are you testing, which will also make the number go higher. So we look up here at the top of the list, and Luxembourg is the most tested country in the world, or excuse me, not the most tested country in the world, but the one showing the highest degree of positives at about 1/3 of 1%. But is that because the outbreak is really bad in Luxembourg, or is that because they really tested a lot in Luxembourg? I haven't actually heard anything about Luxembourg. I don't know, but I do know the case with Iceland down below it. Iceland has tested, I believe, everybody in the country at this point in time. Now there's only about 300,000 people in Iceland, so it's like smaller than Provo. Uh, but even so, they've gone out and they've tested everybody. Okay, now this one here is deaths, and this one is probably the most accurate measure of the severity of the outbreak, because almost all the people who die of SARS-CoV-2 do so in a hospital bed. They at least at some point go through the hospital system, and so this kind of shows us the extent to which the hospital system is overloaded. And of course, Italy is at the top of that list, and Spain is not far behind. And if you notice here, there's a big gap down to the third country there, that is the Netherlands. I was actually kind of surprised at that, that the Netherlands and Belgium come up next on the list. I had no idea. You don't hear as much about them in the news because those countries are simply not as big. Okay. In both of these, okay, the United States is pretty far down the list because we don't test that much, but maybe the disease is not that widespread here in a lot of places. Personally, I don't really believe that, but that's possibly the case. Um, we inch up a little higher on the death rate, but it's not as high as, 15 or so other countries, mostly in Western Europe. Okay. And then lastly, over here, we have the rate of people that are recovered from the virus, had it, been through the hospital system, recovered, and went home. Um, and I think that on this one, we need to be a bit careful on this because different countries are going to declare people recovered under different criteria. Okay, so if we take the case of China, a post I made to the blog the other day showed that the data in China for recoveries just doesn't match up with what other countries have actually seen. So this rate of recovery in China might actually be rather on the high side. Okay, if we look at their testing is much further down. Excuse me, their cases are much further down. I might be missing it here somewhere. I thought China was even on the list. Maybe they're not. Okay. And their number of deaths is not terribly high either. Okay. So the United States ranks higher than both of those. Okay. Now, to get even more perspective on this, I went off further to the right and I did some analysis for individual states of interest. So, New York State is obviously where the outbreak is the worst right now. And if we look at their testing rates, so remember this is a combination of people who have the illness and people who've actually been tested for it, New York State now turns out to be the most heavily tested place in the world. Okay, heavier even than Luxembourg. Now, their death rate is not too high. This is not in the range of Italy or Spain, but if I can highlight that and this at the same time, you could see that New York State would actually be number 3 in the world. It's a distant third to Italy and Spain. Um, New York State might end up like Italy and Spain, but right now it's not even close. But it is worse than every other country in Western Europe. Next, I did Utah. We don't have much of an outbreak here at this time, but what I think is interesting here is that our rate of ICU beds in Utah is exactly the same, roughly, as it is in New York State. So if we get an outbreak like they have in New York, we're going to be in the exact same situation. And if we go down to Iron County, it's even worse, okay, because we have far fewer beds to cover the counties that we might be drawing upon. And that's probably not surprising for the state of Utah that there's a density of ICU beds in the Wasatch Front, and the more rural counties just don't have them. Now, I also went out and constructed data for the New York City metropolitan area, and I was kind of surprised at how well this actually turned out. The New York metropolitan area does not have that high of a death rate, nor that high of a testing rate or case rate. Um, But what this reflects is that the New York metropolitan area includes a whole bunch of counties in New Jersey, a whole bunch of counties in Connecticut, and some upriver from New York that where the outbreak is simply not that bad yet. So the outbreak is terrible in the eastern boroughs of New York, Queens and Brooklyn on Long Island. It's bad in the Bronx. It's horrible in Westchester, and I think like not Suffolk County. I forget what the name of the other county is there. Maybe it's Suffern County or something like that. It's horrible north of the city. And it's getting worse in the city itself. But in the metropolitan area itself, it's okay. And you can kind of see that because of the population numbers here 23 million people in the New York metropolitan area. The city of New York only has about 8 million. So that's a whole lot of people in New Jersey and Connecticut that get added on there. Okay. So, anyways, I have designed this spreadsheet as best I can to be reusable and robust. So, you ought to be able to download this and play with this. And it should be relatively easy to update in the sense that if I go all the way over to the left here, if a couple days out I go and copy a new pile of data off the Wikipedia page and put it into here, everything off to the right hand side ought to update. So that's enough for tonight. I will put up more stuff tomorrow. Bye.